What's the most shocking way karma struck the bride or groom at a wedding? Story 1. I was a wedding photographer at a high-end venue, and the bride was a total nightmare from the get-go. She was rude to the staff, demanding the impossible from the vendors, and treating her bridesmaids like dirt. I overheard her telling her maid of honor that she was marrying her fiancé because of his wealth, not love. Everyone could tell she wasn't happy, but the show had to go on. The ceremony went off without a hitch, and then came the reception. During the first dance, the bride's phone buzzed, and she excused herself for a quick call. She returned to the dance floor, but this time her face was pale, and she was clearly shaken. Turns out, the phone call was from her ex, who had sent her a message just before the ceremony saying he regretted breaking up with her and wanted her back. While she was dancing with her husband, her ex had sent a text that read, "I'll always love you. You were the one that got away, but now it's too late." The ex's timing couldn't have been more poetic, and the bride's smile immediately faded as she tried to mask her shock. She had just married a man she clearly didn't love, and in that moment, the karma of it all hit her harder than anything I had ever seen. The rest of the night, she was visibly distracted and avoided her new husband. That was karma's way of reminding her, no one gets away with it. Story 2. I was invited to my cousin's wedding, and everything seemed perfect. The bride and groom had been together for almost a decade, and their love story was one for the books. They'd known each other since high school, and everyone thought they were soulmates. However, I was close with one of the bridesmaids, and she had a bit of a secret. She told me that the bride had cheated on the groom with someone else a few months ago, but she convinced him it was just a mistake and he forgave her. The bridesmaid said the guilt was eating the bride alive, but she was too proud to admit her mistake to anyone. During the wedding, just after the vows were exchanged, the groom gave an emotional speech about how he forgave the bride for her past mistakes. It was heartwarming, but then things took an unexpected turn. After the first dance, as the couple was mingling with the guests, the groom received a message on his phone. The bride had left it on the table, and he accidentally opened it. The message was from the same guy the bride had cheated with, and it was a reminder about their special night. The groom went cold, confronted the bride in front of everyone, and the whole reception turned into a nightmare. The bride's face went ashen, and she tried to explain, but the damage was already done. Karma hit her hard, and instead of the joyous occasion everyone expected, it turned into a public spectacle of betrayal and heartbreak. The wedding ended early, and the couple divorced just 6 months later. Story 3. I worked at a wedding venue, and we had a couple that was absolutely perfect on paper. The groom was a wealthy business owner, and the bride was stunning, an influencer with tens of thousands of followers. They had a lavish ceremony, and everything was going smooth. The groom was attentive, the bride was glowing, and everything seemed perfect. But then, during the reception, the groom's brother, who had been drinking heavily, made a toast. He started by praising the couple's future, then segued into a shocking revelation. He revealed that the bride had been sending flirtatious messages to him for months, even after getting engaged. He pulled up a series of texts as proof. The crowd fell silent, and the bride went pale as she tried to deny it. But the texts didn't lie. The groom looked crushed, and he immediately left the reception, storming out of the venue. The bride begged him to stay, but it was too late. Karma worked its magic in real time, exposing her infidelity in front of all their friends and family. The marriage never took place, and the bride was left to deal with the fallout of her actions. The groom's brother later apologized, but the damage was irreparable, and the bride's reputation took a massive hit. It was an unforgettable reminder that what goes around truly comes around. Story 4. A friend of mine went to a wedding where the bride's family was notorious for being controlling and selfish. The bride, let's call her Amanda, had an extravagant dream wedding in mind, and her parents funded most, but they had one condition. The ceremony had to be as traditional and perfect as possible according to their standards. Amanda was stressed, but her fiancé, let's call him Jake, was supportive, or so it seemed. As the ceremony started, everything looked picture perfect. Flowers, the setting, the guests, it was all straight out of a fairy tale. But as soon as the vows began, Jake suddenly stopped and turned to Amanda. He told her that he couldn't go through with the wedding. Everyone was stunned, including Amanda. He then revealed that he'd been in love with someone else for months, and had been cheating on Amanda with a coworker. The bride's face turned red, and her parents were furious. But karma didn't stop there. Jake's coworker, who had been hiding in the crowd, stood up and revealed herself to be pregnant with Jake's child. The groom's betrayal and lies were exposed in front of everyone. Amanda's heartbreak was palpable, but her family's overbearing nature had alienated her fiancé, and ultimately, karma had its way of balancing things out. Story 5. I attended the wedding of an old friend, Mark, and his fiancée, Lisa. They seemed like the perfect couple, but there was a strange feeling of tension between the two. Mark had always been a bit of a prankster, and we all joked that he wasn't really ready for marriage. But then something unexpected happened during the reception. As everyone gathered around to watch the newlyweds cut the cake, Mark seemed unusually nervous. When Lisa went to grab a slice, Mark stopped her and made a joke about how they should do it a little different. Mark suddenly dropped to one knee and proposed again. This time, he pulled out a different ring. It wasn't an engagement ring, but a fake one. He said, "I think it's time to be more honest with you, Lisa. I never wanted to marry you. I've been seeing someone else for months." The guests went silent. Lisa was devastated. She had no idea, and Mark's betrayal was out in the open. Karma had finally come back for him, and it had never been so humiliating. Lisa walked away from the reception, and the wedding was called off. Mark was left alone while his true feelings were exposed for everyone to see. The whole thing turned into a spectacle, and no one could believe the audacity of it. Karma struck in the most dramatic way possible, and Mark's reputation was shattered that day. Story 6. I was at my cousin's wedding, and let me tell you, it was a total mess from the start. The bride, Sarah, was gorgeous, and the groom, Tom, was a kind, quiet guy who seemed to be madly in love with her. Everyone could tell they had a picture-perfect relationship, except for me, because I knew the truth. I had heard from one of the bridesmaids that Sarah had been cheating on Tom for months, with one of Tom's closest friends no less. And despite the affair, Sarah was pushing forward with the wedding, claiming that she had no choice and that everything would be fine once they were married. At the reception, things seemed to go off without a hitch at first. But then, during the best man speech, Tom's friend accidentally spilled a secret. He wasn't the best man by choice. Tom had asked him to step in because Sarah's ex had been chosen initially. In his drunken state, the best man jokingly said, "Well, Tom, at least she's not still talking to her ex, right? You know, the one she kept seeing behind your back?" The room went dead silent. Everyone looked at Sarah, who went pale. The groom, looking confused and slightly hurt, asked her if this was true. Sarah tried to laugh it off, but it was clear the truth was out. It was a disaster. Tom stormed off and the wedding ended in chaos. Karma had a way of catching up with her, and in that moment Sarah realized she had just lost the man who loved her. Story 7. A friend of mine, Megan, got married to an absolute gem of a guy named Andrew. They had been together for years, and everyone thought they were the perfect couple. The wedding was gorgeous, filled with amazing decorations, and their families got along well, making the ceremony one of the happiest events we'd all attended. But there was one thing no one knew. Megan had secretly been sabotaging Andrew's career for months. She had been sending anonymous emails to his boss, making up stories about him being lazy, unreliable, and disrespectful. It wasn't until their wedding day, after the vows were exchanged, that Andrew found out. The best man, one of Andrew's closest childhood friends, gave a speech praising both of them. The speech seemed a little too perfect until it took an unexpected turn. The best man pulled out his phone, and on the screen was an email chain from Megan's personal account to Andrew's boss. The emails were filled with malicious lies about Andrew, all aimed at ruining his reputation at work. Everyone froze, and Megan's face turned white as Andrew confronted her in front of all their guests. "You tried to ruin me for no reason," he said, his voice shaking with disbelief. Megan tried to deny it, but the evidence was clear. In that moment, the truth came crashing down, and the wedding turned from a joyous celebration to a public spectacle of betrayal. Andrew walked out of the reception, leaving Megan to face the consequences of her actions. Karma couldn't have been more fitting. Story 8. I had a friend who worked at a luxury wedding venue, and she witnessed one of the most jaw-dropping moments she'd ever seen. A couple named Emma and Jake were getting married at this grand, high-class hotel. They were both beautiful people with perfect looks and social media profiles that made them seem like royalty. They had everything going for them: the lavish dress, the extravagant ceremony, and a guest list full of high-profile people. But what no one knew was that Jake, the groom, had been hiding a huge secret. He had been involved with another woman for nearly a year while still planning his wedding to Emma. The day of the wedding arrived, and it seemed like the perfect day. The ceremony went smoothly, and the reception was filled with love and laughter. However, right after the first dance, Jake's phone started buzzing nonstop. Emma noticed him checking his phone multiple times but thought little of it. She was enjoying the moment, thinking that everything was perfect. But when Jake's phone rang for the third time, he stepped outside to answer it. When he returned, his face was pale and he was visibly shaken. Emma, concerned, asked what was wrong, but Jake didn't say anything. As the night went on, he seemed distant and cold. Just before they were about to cut the cake, Jake's phone buzzed again. This time, Emma saw the name on the screen. The other one. She grabbed the phone and answered it, demanding an explanation. The other woman on the line calmly told Emma that she had been seeing Jake for over a year and that they were planning a life together. The look on Emma's face as she processed this betrayal was heart-wrenching. She immediately turned to Jake, who had no words left. The wedding was abruptly called off, and Emma left, leaving Jake to face the consequences of his actions. Karma had shown up in the most brutal way. Story 9. I had been planning my wedding for months, and everything was coming together perfectly. It was an intimate affair with just our closest family and friends. I had no idea that my fiancé, Ben, was secretly talking to someone else behind my back. A mutual friend of ours, Sophie, confided in me just days before the wedding that Ben had been messaging his ex-girlfriend. Ben had sworn to me that they were just friends, but the messages Sophie found were far from friendly. They were filled with flirtation and even some suggestive remarks. The worst part? The ex-girlfriend had been hinting that Ben would come back to her eventually. I was devastated, and the whole situation seemed like a nightmare I couldn't escape from. I knew I had to do something, but I also wanted to avoid ruining the wedding. However, Karma had a different plan. During the reception, when Ben was giving his thank you speech, Sophie stood up and confronted him. She pulled out her phone and played the audio recording of the text exchange between Ben and his ex. The room went silent. I was in shock, and Ben's face turned white as he realized everything was exposed. The betrayal was laid out in front of all our friends and family. I didn't even know how to react. Ben tried to apologize, but I couldn't look at him the same way again. I called off the wedding on the spot, leaving Ben standing there, humiliated. Karma came through, showing him that his lies had a price. Story 10. There's this one wedding I'll never forget. It was a high-end affair, full of luxurious details. The bride, Claire, had been the center of attention for years, and everyone thought her fiancé, Ben, was the luckiest man alive. They were both stunning, and their love story seemed straight out of a romance novel. But what no one knew was that Claire had been secretly plotting to leave Ben for another man she had been seeing for months. The man in question, Mark, was a friend of Ben's, and Claire thought she could pull off the biggest betrayal without anyone finding out. On the day of the wedding, as the ceremony was coming to an end, something strange happened. Claire stepped away from the altar for a moment, pretending to fix her dress. She had a moment to herself, and that's when Ben's phone rang. His face turned pale as he looked at the name on the screen. It was Mark, the same man Claire had been secretly seeing. Ben, not knowing what to do, answered the phone. Claire had no idea what was going on, and the guests were confused as they waited for the couple to return to the altar. Ben's voice, shaky with emotion, was heard saying, "Why would you do this to me? After everything, why now?" The entire church was in a state of disbelief. Claire heard every word of the conversation and she froze. Karma had arrived early, catching her in the act of betrayal. In front of everyone, Ben confronted her, and the wedding was immediately called off. Claire was left standing there, her plans unraveled as the man she thought she could deceive walked away for good. Story 11. I was working as a wedding planner when I witnessed one of the most jaw-dropping moments. A couple, Caroline and Jack, had a gorgeous wedding planned. They were the picture of perfection, with every detail of the event well thought out and every guest in awe of the couple's apparent happiness. Caroline, the bride, was stunning, and Jack, the groom, was equally charming. However, there was one little secret no one knew, except for me and a few others. Caroline had been having an affair with a man from her office for months leading up to the wedding. The affair wasn't just a random fling. It had developed into a full-blown relationship. Caroline had convinced Jack that her late nights were due to work, but it was really because she was meeting up with her lover. I knew about it because the other woman had confided in me, worried that the affair would be exposed. But what happened at the wedding was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Just as the vows were being exchanged, Caroline's phone buzzed. She quickly excused herself and stepped outside to answer, leaving Jack standing at the altar. She came back a few moments later, visibly shaken. I noticed the tension in the air, but no one else seemed to understand what had happened. During the reception, Jack's best man made a speech, which started out lovely, but then took a turn. He revealed that the night before the wedding, he had accidentally found a series of text messages from Caroline's lover on her phone. The messages were clear. She had been planning to leave Jack for him. The best man read the texts aloud in front of the entire guest list. Caroline turned bright red and tried to cover it up, but it was too late. The guests gasped in shock as Jack stormed off in disbelief. The wedding collapsed in front of everyone, and Caroline was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. Karma had come for her in the most brutal way imaginable. Story 12. I've been a wedding photographer for over a decade, and I've seen my fair share of drama, but nothing quite like this. A couple, Sarah and Kyle, had been dating for several years before getting engaged. On the surface, they seemed like the perfect couple. Sarah was beautiful and bubbly, while Kyle was quiet, thoughtful, and incredibly kind. Everyone assumed they were the ideal match, but I had heard whispers from Sarah's friends that there were things about her past that Kyle didn't know. The day of the wedding arrived, and the ceremony went smooth, too smooth. The couple exchanged their vows, and everything seemed to be perfect. But as the reception was underway, something went terribly wrong. As Sarah was dancing with Kyle, I noticed a man in the back of the room, standing alone with his arms crossed. He was staring directly at Sarah, and she seemed to avoid his gaze, which immediately caught my attention. During the middle of the reception, the mysterious man walked up to the couple, interrupting their first dance. He stepped right in front of Sarah and Kyle and confronted Sarah. "I can't believe you're marrying him," he said loudly. The room went silent, and everyone stared in disbelief as the man continued. "You promised you'd be with. You told me you loved." Sarah's face went pale. She stammered, "This isn't what it seems," but it was too late. The man revealed that he and Sarah had been in a secret relationship for nearly a year, and the only reason she was marrying Kyle was for his money and social status. Kyle looked absolutely devastated, and the guests were in shock as the truth about Sarah's betrayal was revealed. After a few moments of silence, Kyle walked out of the reception, and Sarah was left to face the fallout of her lies. The man who exposed her was later revealed to be her ex-fiancé, someone she had secretly been seeing on and off for years. It was the ultimate karma, and Sarah's reputation was forever tarnished. The wedding ended that day, and Sarah was left to figure out how to put her life back together. Story 13. A few years ago, I attended a wedding where everything seemed too perfect to be true, and it was. The bride, Lily, was a social media influencer, and her fiancé, Tom, was a quiet guy who worked as a lawyer. From the outside, they looked like the perfect couple. Lily was stunning. Her followers adored her, and Tom seemed to have it all together. But the truth was, Lily had been using Tom for his wealth and connections. She had never been fully committed to him, and her real goal was to live the glamorous life she always dreamed of. I overheard Lily's bridesmaids talking the night before the wedding about how Lily had been stringing Tom along for years. They said that she had been secretly meeting up with her ex-G. As the reception went on, Lily received a call in the middle of the dance. She stepped aside to take it, and when she returned, she was visibly upset. No one knew what had happened, but she looked completely thrown off. As the night progressed, Lily became more and more distant from Tom. Finally, during the cake-cutting ceremony, the truth came out. Lily's ex-boyfriend showed up uninvited, and in front of everyone, he revealed that he had been seeing Lily throughout her engagement to Tom. He even went as far as to show the entire room a series of intimate texts and photos Lily had sent him. Tom, who had been standing next to her, looked at her in disbelief. "You never loved me, did you?" he asked. Lily tried to deny it, but her ex had all the proof. The wedding ended abruptly, and Tom walked away, leaving Lily to face the consequences of her actions. Karma couldn't have been more evident that day. Lily lost everything: her relationship, her reputation, and her status. Story 14. One of the most shocking moments I've ever seen at a wedding occurred when my best friend Rachel was getting married. She had been with her fiancé Mark for 5 years, and they were both excited about the wedding. Mark was a great guy, patient, loyal, and caring. Rachel, on the other hand, had always been a bit impulsive and not always trustworthy. Over the years, I had noticed that Rachel had a habit of flirting with other guys, but I thought it was just a phase. Unfortunately, it wasn't. On the wedding day, everything seemed perfect until the vows. As Mark was speaking, his voice suddenly faltered, and I could tell something was wrong. He looked at Rachel with a serious expression and said, "Rachel, I know about the messages. I know what you've been doing." The guests looked at each other in confusion, and Rachel froze. Mark continued, "You've been texting another man for the past 6 months. I've seen the conversations, and I can't marry you knowing that you've been lying to me." The room went dead silent as Mark pulled out Rachel's phone from his pocket. He showed the entire room the series of messages between Rachel and another man, someone she had been seeing on the side. Rachel's face turned bright red as she stammered, trying to explain, but it was too late. Mark turned and walked away, leaving Rachel at the altar, humiliated. Rachel tried to chase after him, but Mark was resolute. The guests slowly started leaving, and Rachel's perfect wedding day turned into a public embarrassment. Karma had come for her, and it was clear that Mark's decision to stand up for himself was one of the best moments of his life. Rachel was left to reckon with the consequences of her betrayal. Story 15. I was a guest at a wedding where everything was going perfectly, until it wasn't. The bride, Jessica, and her groom, Adam, were both well known in their community. Jessica had been planning the wedding for months, and every detail was flawless. But I had heard from a friend of mine who worked as a caterer at the venue that Adam had been acting strange in the weeks leading up to the wedding. He had been distant, and he had even been seen out on a few business trips that didn't seem like business at all. The wedding day came, and everything appeared to be going smoothly, until the reception. Halfway through the evening, Adam's best man made a toast. And it was then that things took a turn. The best man, clearly nervous, stood up and began his speech, but then he paused. He pulled out his phone and showed a picture of Adam, taken just the night before, at a hotel with a woman who was not Jessica. Jessica, who had been glowing just moments before, turned pale as she processed what was happening. Adam stood frozen, and the best man continued, "I had to say something. You can't keep lying to her, Adam. She deserves better." The entire room was in stunned silence as Jessica confronted Adam, who tried to apologize, but it was clear that the trust had been shattered. The wedding was immediately called off, and Jessica walked out of the venue, leaving Adam to face the truth. Karma had struck, and Adam had lost the love of his life in a moment of deceit. The wedding ended in complete chaos, and it was a reminder to everyone, no secret is safe forever. Boyfriend, who was also a wealthy businessman. The bridesmaids knew the truth but were too scared to say anything, afraid of Lily's wrath. The wedding day arrived and everything seemed flawless, but behind the scenes, a storm was brewing.